Happy 2024 and welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and before we do literally anything else, Fitz, congratulations on your 500 points.
Thank you very much. As I said, it's the fastest I've ever won a bet.
I'm not
So,
going to live this down for a while.
oh, I plan to enjoy this victory as much as possible, which
Great.
probably isn't a lot, but anyway.
Today, we are once again joined by a guest. Hadley is back.
Hello.
And today, we are continuing our exploration of the revived era with The Runaway Bride, the 2006 Christmas special, the introduction of Donna Noble, and the first episode of Revival Who without Rose Tyler.
Hmm.
So there's a lot that this episode has riding on it. If anything, it has to introduce new viewers to the concept of a show without a stable companion position. Obviously, they've already had to say goodbye and hello to a doctor, but Rose was around much longer than either. So I'm sure there were many people in late 2006 who were going, without Rose, I'm not interested in watching this show. As is the case literally any time there's a main cast change in this show for some reason.
Mm.
Um, it's also got to live up to the previous year's Christmas special, which was pretty beloved from what I remember at the time.
Mm.
And my opinion on rewatching this story is pretty much the same as it has been for a while now. I think this is fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. 100%.
it's well, obviously we'll go into detail on unpacking the ins and outs of it, but yeah, like when you put it together, it's okay. There are bits in it that I quite enjoy, and I think there are certainly some parts that are stronger than others. But when you look at it all together, yeah, it's fine, generally speaking.
Kind of forgets that it's a Christmas special halfway into the episode.
It does, yeah, and that is
Yeah.
it's a symptom of something that will continue on to future Christmas specials, and I'm a little annoyed that it's the second one and we're already seeing this, where
Mm.
it's an episode that like is only really loosely based around Christmas beyond like one or two slightly more comedic or whimsical elements. Um, as much as we
Mm.
both liked Church on Ruby Road, that was kind of a thing that was present there as well, where it wasn't really a story that needed to take place on Christmas. They just decided to make that Ruby's birthday, and that's how you tie it in.
Yeah, I think purely because it tied in as much as it did, it's a little bit stronger in the Church on Ruby Road than it is here, but still, it's as you say, an issue, and I certainly think the sort of necessity for the Christmas setting was better in the Christmas Invasion than it is here, or arguably even in the Church on Ruby Road.
Yeah,
Only
well, it's
peaks with
also
the angels carrying David Tennant off in the Titanic episode. I don't think we're getting any higher than
we'll
that.
we'll get there eventually. Not that far off, actually. Um,
Yeah.
but I think a part of the reason why this was initially like a special episode and why it is, in fact, is because of Catherine Tate's casting. Now, it's kind of weird to say looking back now, considering how much of
Mm.
a hugely impactful figure Donna Noble is in the mythos of Revival era Who, but she was never meant to be. This was only ever intended to be the single appearance of Catherine Tate and of Donna Noble. And it was in a weird way a little bit of stunt casting because Catherine Tate already had her comedy show. She was already a big name in British TV comedy. So casting her in this position was kind of a way of going, it's a special episode, let's get a bigger name that we might otherwise uh, be able to reach out to for a role like this. And let's also like let's give her a big focus now that we can because we are short a companion. I think that is, I think, a big part of why there's a special quality surrounding her, or at least there might have been back then. Of course, now looking back, it's pretty pedestrian seeing Catherine Tate's name in the titles. But yeah, apart from those sort of meta elements and the fact that it is, in certain elements, a little more comedic than we're used to by this point in Revival Who, it's not really that much of a Christmas special.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
Robot Santas.
Robot Santas and A Christmas Star.
Yeah, basically.
So in that respect, not great. So now we just have to basically judge it as an episode.
Mm.
Um, and I can give us a bit of context from the larger Doctor Who community, as is often my role here. Out of 210 votes, this story has an average rating of 6.7.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm gonna be kind of brutal to this episode.
Yeah.
Maybe just because as a reaction to people just be like, it's fine. I'm gonna be more on the ends of it is mid.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
have a lot of good or bad things to say about it
That's
until
fair.
like the villain reveal, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I have some things to say about good things to say about it before that point. I mean, the third act is its own little thing. We'll get to it, but yeah, I think my instinct is to say it should be rated a little bit lower than that.
Yeah.
But not by too much. Certainly 6.7. It's understandable, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like, for me, this is always an episode that feels kind of weird to rewatch. And I think it's primarily because, and we'll get there, but it's the fact that Donna's characterization is very, very abrasive, more so than she will be when she's recharacterized for Series 4. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but um, it did lead to audiences in 2008 being a little trepidatious when they announced that Donna was coming back. They were like, "Oh, we don't want a full season of her. She was fine as a standalone, like as a palate cleanser from Rose. Well, maybe not even a palate cleanser, but just like as a change of pace from the kind of character Rose was. But otherwise, not really companion material. Of course, everyone would have been proven very, very wrong by the end of Series 4, but we'll get there. But apart from that, it's only really got like a few moments that I really, really remember outside of having just watched it back. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
weirdly a standard-ish Doctor Who story, and that's
Yeah.
weird to say because there are some big left turns in various parts of the plot, but like I said, nothing that really stands out.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, it could be more generic,
Oh
but
yeah,
like when you think late 2000s Doctor Who, this is kind of what you're thinking about. Certainly minus the Christmas stuff. This is what you're thinking about.
yeah,
It's alien invasions, little bits of comedy, um, some twists, and a ludicrous over the top villain. So what are we talking about there?
yeah. 6.6 for plot. I think that this is one of the weaker elements of the story, and I'll get to it, but
Yes.
there are heaps of elements where the story either feels rushed or contradictory to itself, particularly in the back half.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like the most well thought out narrative.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed there were little it was to an extent sort of death by a thousand cuts because there was nothing super like major with the plot where I thought, oh, what on earth is happening here? But just small things, small conveniences, even some sort of scientific inaccuracies, which I know maybe that's a bit of a cheap shot because it's Doctor Who and it's always been a little bit wacky, but just stuff that really sort of downgrades my enjoyment of the narrative, as you say, particularly in I think the third act is where it really not falls apart, but starts to show its the cracks in the facade.
7.6 for acting. This, I think, I'm really torn on this. Like, I don't think anyone is horrible, but I don't think
Yeah,
anyone is exceptional either.
I think
yeah,
Catherine Tate's probably putting it on a bit too much.
Maybe a bit, yeah, especially in the first act. But I think that what I'll say about Catherine Tate is that there is that moment after she finds out Lance is not who she thought he was. And it's a really quiet moment of her just sitting down in the TARDIS processing it all. and she plays that very, very well. And it sort of, in a bizarre way, foreshadows how often Catherine Tate is going to have to go to that dramatic well during her own season, because Christ was Series 4 unkind to Donna Noble.
Yeah, I think, like, and even the bit where, in the moment when she's realizing in real time who Lance is, and when she says, but I love you, that's quite stirring, and I think it's a nice bit of character growth for her.
Yeah, it's those moments I think that Catherine Tate excels at in this. I don't think she. It's difficult that the script gave her so many big outbursts, because I do think those are kind of diminishing returns.
Yeah. Would you say, actually, in terms of the performances, would you actually put that down mostly to just the way the characters are written? Because that's how I interpret it.
Maybe. I mean, I think Lance can be a bit hammy, a bit too much even.
Yeah, I guess.
I think the moment when he reveals himself, he has this big, it's essentially an evil villain laugh. And I think that it would have been and I'll get to this when we speak about Lance a bit further, but I think an interpretation of Lance I would have preferred to see is just a misguided, pawn, essentially, as opposed to, in this moment, portraying him as a Machiavellian schemer. And he is inevitably the pawn. But I think that, especially because the ending tries to go for he didn't deserve his fate kind of thing, which arguably he didn't. I mean, that's a horrible way to die. But, it barely earns that ending, because they don't really, as soon as the reveal comes in, they don't try to play him down the line. They just pivot straight. It's the Disney twist villain syndrome.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
7.1 for effects. I think the majority of the special effects in this episode are very strong. And I think that the Rachnos itself is a feat of practical effects mixed with digital.
Yeah. It's, even her design and the way they've made it work as a practical effect is really quite compelling, especially given how many, it's a giant 8-legged spider creature. You imagine how much technical craft would have to gone into the puppeteering for that thing. It's kind of wild, which is really great. I think the one scene that really stood out to me with the effects was the scene where the TARDIS is chasing the taxi along the road. It looks pretty fake. Certainly not enough to ruin it, but that stands out. I think a lot of the effects in this story most of them are practical, and they sort of works to its benefit. I do want to highlight the flood scene, because I was watching it, and special effects not my area of expertise, but it looks like what they've done is they've taken a miniature set of the building, and flooded it with a small amount of water, and they've just made it, the way they filmed it, it just looks like a big amount of water flooding a big space. I've seen similar stuff done in old sci-fi and adventure movies, so that was interesting.
What else is on the timescales? Going back there, 6.9 for replay value. Yeah.
I guess a lot of people just come back to see Donna's first appearance.
Yeah.
I don't know what else this episode has going for it.
I mean,
but
I know that there are quite a few people I've seen in the timescales who have this episode as their yearly Christmas thing that they watch, which it's bizarre. This isn't even the first Doctor Who Christmas story I would consider doing that for.
Yeah. Yeah, that does seem a little bizarre, and even with the Donna of it all, it's great seeing her here, and Catherine Tate is giving a really fun performance. But in comparison to season 4, I don't even know if I'd say this is a super strong Donna episode. So
no,
yeah, I think it didn't get really much worse for me on a second watch, but it certainly didn't get a lot better. So I do think 6.9 is a little bit high for that.
Yeah, and 33 out of 103 say that this story requires a previous. There is quite a lot of the Doctor Mrs. Rose stuff that you miss if you don't know that story. And also, when the Santa robots first show up, you don't get that instant sense of, uh-oh. But apart from that, it's fairly standalone.
Yeah.
There's that amusing scene with Donna and the Doctor where the Doctor's like, "You don't remember last Christmas there was a spaceship flying over?" And she's like, "Oh, I was pretty hungover."
Yeah, there are references they make to previous events. And yeah, I do think that I think for the most part you can pick up on most of the important bits if this is your first story.
Yeah.
But I would still say don't make this your first story, as is the case with a lot of Doctor Who, as I'm finding.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Doctor losing Rose is framed in a very similar way, I guess, to like the Ninth Doctor getting over the Time War.
Yes, yeah, I was thinking that. And it actually made me think it would be interesting, like, if, say, 30 years from now, after Doctor Who gets cancelled and revived again, if instead of the mystery of the first season being the Time War, we pick up the show right after the Doctor has lost a companion, and we have to explore that side of things, having not seen what happened. I think that might be interesting, but it would require a cancellation, and I don't want that to happen at this point, so forget about it, that idea for now. So let's jump in to some more specifics. Well, I think the easiest place to start here, let's just kick off again from the very mild exploration of the Doctor's grief on losing Rose in this story. And, like, you get what they're trying to go for here, where it's like the Doctor's, like, missing Rose, but also now he's sort of like, he's been thrust into this different situation and needs to focus on that. Doesn't really have time to mourn, finds a few moments of quiet to sort of grieve, but largely has to keep in mind what Donna's going through. I think that they should have committed to this way more in this episode, because that would have made the next season different, because you wouldn't have to have the full story of the Doctor fully getting over Rose by being so mean to Martha, which is what he does.
I mean,
we're getting there. We're starting season 3 proper in just a few weeks when you're listening to this. I don't think there is a single Series 3 episode that doesn't in some way mention Rose. Like, even though she's not there, she overshadows quite a lot of that season, with the Doctor still trying to get over her. And in my head, it's like, well, why can't we just do that in this episode and have this be... Like, it makes sense for him to be grieving for her now. He's literally just lost her.
Yeah.
But, like, you're giving Martha a really bad start. You know, like, and we're gonna, like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it. We'll get to it when we get to it. But one of my pet peeves about Series 3 is the fact that Martha is so overshadowed by Rose as a previous companion. And that, in part, to me at least, is why she is so underrated, because even the show itself is like, oh, if only Rose were here, Rose would know what to do. The Doctor misses Rose, when Martha is literally right there.
I mean, I think the grief element here, it's handled, like, well enough, and like, even if you haven't seen the previous season and don't have any idea who Rose is, you get a pretty good sense of what the Doctor's going through and what that context is. But as you say, like, it's not, they don't devote a lot of time to it. And that sort of makes sense because they want to get through the wacky sci-fi adventure, but as you say, priorities, I guess.
Yeah, to me, it's just like, if he had come out the end of this story, maybe not like fully over it, but like, like, he ends the story, he offers Donna a place in the TARDIS, but he still ends the story being like, I don't need anyone, I still miss Rose. Like, if he had ended that story fully open to the possibility of picking up a new companion, and not just because Donna happened to be there, I think it would have been a bit different. But the fact that literally the last line of the episode is her name was Rose, it telegraphs to me, okay, so there has been no change in the Doctor's mental state from the start of this episode to the end. At which point, what was the point of devoting even as much time to it as it did if it wasn't going to adjust anything regarding the status quo?
Is it a common trend that Christmas specials don't contribute that much to the overall narrative?
It. I mean, it depends on it. I think it's a year by year situation because the end of time is a Christmas special, and that is incredibly important to the narrative. The series 8 Christmas special fixes the Doctor and Clara situation. Quite a few Christmas specials are regeneration stories, but I think it's about 50-50 actually on incredibly important to the larger narrative and lighter filler episode.
Well, I mean, the Christmas Invasion sets up some things, but they don't, pay off until like over a season later, and it's that there's nothing like I think super significant that gets a lot of attention in the Christmas Invasion that also gets brought up later. It's only small references to things that become bigger in the future. Mind you, my experience
Christmas
with
Invasion is also the first post regeneration episode. It's
Yeah.
very important for like the mythos of the show for that to
yeah,
happen.
that's true. That episode, it's doing a surprising amount actually in the grand scheme of things. Yeah.
But I think this one, it definitely falls on the filler end of the spectrum, which is weird to say
Yeah,
given the introduction of Donna Noble.
Well,
It
you're
is
right,
odd.
Cuff, in that it was never intended to introduce a new companion. So I
Yeah.
guess it was just like, here's a special with special guest star Catherine Tate.
Yeah. Yeah, that was always the intention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget. Like they had plans all like that before the start of Series 4, and they had a name for the new companion. But then I don't remember who, but someone suggested getting Donna back, and I think the history was made from there. We got the best companion in Doctor Who history.
Mm-hmm. What I love so much about Donna Noble is they just said, what if the companion didn't want to have sex with the Doctor?
Yeah, I
What if
mean,
we tried that for once?
I mean, it is a very refreshing change of pace to see someone on the TARDIS that isn't head over heels for the Doctor and can get lost in his eyes all day long.
She kind of hates him.
Yeah, I mean, in her mind, at the beginning at least, rightfully so, she thinks that she's been abducted on her wedding day, and that's all she can think about. I do like that it's like less than a quarter of the way into the story when she starts to soften on him. Like, because they have quite a lot up front of very, very yelly Catherine Tate, give her quite a lot to yell and let her be good at it, let her flex her comedic chops, but then like he saves her, which in that chase sequence, which yes, the TARDIS, it doesn't look perfect, but maybe by 2006 standards it was all right. And also, it's the first time we've ever seen the TARDIS behave that way for an extended period of time in the show. I think for even going back to 1963, you'd be hard pressed to find a car chase sequence including the TARDIS in classic era Who.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, Sean Pertwee had his own car for that, so he didn't need a TARDIS.
He had two cars.
Yep.
So,
of course he did.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, you haven't seen the Whomobile yet, Hadley.
Oh.
No, you got me to look it up. It looks like a boat.
Yes.
Yeah, wacky sci-fi boat rolling along the ground. Great stuff.
But yeah, you're right. Donna in this story. I think it's weird to this episode is sort of like a weird microcosm of the Donna arc in Series 4 as well, in the sense that her time with the Doctor makes her a better person, and then in the end she leaves him. Like it's not. Obviously, it's way more detailed and fleshed out in Series 4. But like it's great that they had that as an idea for the character even in this episode, and it's really great that they harken back to where this character began by making that her tragic ending at the end of Series 4.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Now we do have to briefly here mention the 60th anniversary specials. I've brought up the way the character ends in series 4. That isn't entirely true anymore because the 60ths kind of undid a lot of that and brought her back. It's difficult to figure out exactly at the moment how much that is going to affect rewatching Donna's stories from the beginning. It didn't really affect anything watching The Runaway Bride, largely because again her character is so different than where it'll end up. But I am sort of bracing myself to get to Journey's End and then watch her ending, and then I wonder how present that little voice in the back of my head is going to be, going, "It's not as sad as it is. It's not as sad as it is because they fix it." Because that is in general something
She just lets it go.
She just lets it go.
She just...
Well, because here's the thing: a lot of people have the same opinion regarding the end of Rose Tyler and how at the end of Journey's End she gets her own doctor and doesn't have to be sad anymore. I don't think that's even true because it doesn't take away from the separation at the end of series 2. That thing, it still happened and they both still had to go through it.
Yeah.
So theoretically the same should hold true for Donna at the end of series 4. I don't know though. So like I for me rewatching series 2, the finale, long after we knew what happened at the end of series 4, it's always had the same impact for me. Now that might also just be because I was never that attached to Rose Tyler in general, but it never took away that my feelings about Rose never really detracted from the separation at the end of series 2. So I'm happy to think I'm at least theoretically that shouldn't be affecting it, but I do always and have always liked Donna, so maybe it'll affect series 4, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out. But
well, I wonder, like, just in the Star Beast, the fact that resolution was so quick, I wonder, is that going to diminish the tragedy of the end of Donna's character arc? I mean, as you say, we'll have to wait and see, but I suspect it might.
My initial thoughts are because, and the episode, and Star Beast doesn't focus on this element of it too much by the end, but it is important for not killing Donna. The fact that there are two people sharing the meta crisis means that ending couldn't have happened at the end of Journey's End.
Yeah.
She couldn't have just let it go then. So I don't think it's gonna. And also, something to keep in mind also, being separated from Donna is the reason why the Doctor went isolationist and almost became the Time Lord Victorious during the 2009 specials. That still almost happened. That's still a thing that he had to go through. So it's not like all of the trauma was wiped clean. There was still a lot of stuff that happened as a result of the end of Series 4 that didn't get undone. So, again, we're talking about Runaway Bride today. We're not talking about Journey's End, but this is a Donna episode, and I'm happy to say that so far, none of the emotional moments have been wrecked by Star Beast, but of course, they weren't really relevant to this story anyway.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about that just didn't really make sense in the episode, you don't have a wedding on Christmas Day.
No.
One thing, churches are super busy on that day.
Yeah.
For another, like, fucking, you're having a turkey lunch with your family. The last thing you want to think about is getting a new husband.
And how would you even, as you say, churches are packed on Christmas. Where would they find a church?
I can't believe I've been raised Catholic my whole life and never once put that together. Of course they wouldn't have been able to get a church on Christmas Day or even Christmas Eve. I think they flip-flop between the two. But
still, like, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
No, absolutely not. Or maybe, but there was also the priest. The priest on his phone for a brief moment, and he's talking about how there's another wedding, and he had to, and another group cancelled. So he's doing at least 3 weddings that day.
Doing the Lord's work.
Oh, I didn't even put that together. That's amazing. Well, the wedding also gives us our first appearance of Sylvia Noble, who is Donna's mum, and the only appearance of Jeffrey Noble, Donna's father. He was originally intended to fill the Wilfred Mott role in Series 4, but he did die during filming. So they replaced him with Wilfred Mott. And it's really really hard to like. Obviously, Wilfred is an incredible character. It's hard to know if Jeffrey Noble would have hit those heights.
Mm.
But you know, the situation being what it is, Jeffrey Noble in this sort of the same as Sylvia, sort of a non-entity, which is unfortunate to say. Like Sylvia has her moments and brief glimpses of the Sylvia that we'll come to know shine through when she for some reason thinks that Donna teleporting out of the church is a prank that Donna's been able to pull off somehow. Like I don't know how anyone watches that happen and thinks anything other than there must be something scientific or magical happening here. I don't know how they think it's a sleight of hand disappearing act.
Well, doesn't she even basically say at some point, it's like, oh, that's Donna up to her old tricks again. I mean, I know she doesn't literally say that, but
yeah,
something along those lines. It's like, damn, was Donna like an amateur magician growing up,
that's another thing. Neither in this episode nor in the rest of her appearance on the show would I describe Donna as cheeky or like prone to practical jokes. So that
on her
line
wedding day of all things.
on her wedding day of all things, exactly, yeah. So like, and especially because she was the one constantly begging Lance to get married in a sequence that is genuinely quite humorous when Donna's telling her account, and it's very different than what happened in reality. But yeah, to me that line just really sticks out because like, up to her old tricks, like either she had a massive change of like personality after these old tricks, or this is a case of Sylvia being incredibly harsh on Donna for no reason, which we'll find out is kind of her deal for a while. Which fair enough.
I'll tell you what, like all these things sort of do, in terms of Sylvia's characterization. To my mind, she's not particularly likable in this episode, and I look at the way she's characterized here and how she's characterized in the Star Beast, and it seems to be night and day. I mean, I think Cuff, you highlighted this when we looked at the Star Beast, but so I was sort of anticipating that, but I wasn't quite prepared for how different Sylvia is in this episode.
Well, it's pretty close to her Series 4 characterization as well, where it's like she doesn't really give Donna a fair shake and doesn't really like. I don't know the right phrasing, but she's kind of harsh on Donna for a lot of it. And I think that the characterization in the Star Beast is a characterization that makes sense. We see bits of it in The End of Time as well, where she's being a bit more careful with Donna because she doesn't obviously want her brain to explode, which fair enough.
Yeah. There's that character arc, which is good that they did that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It was just a bit of a shock watching this story. It's like, man, Sylvia's... she's not very nice, is she? You know.
Also, like, one last thing about the wedding party. Who is Neris?
Like, she get mentioned in the Star Beast? Like,
she does, and she has
remember.
She has a few appearances in Series 4 and the specials as well. But like, they clearly have it's a relationship of pure animosity to the point where Donna, in accusing the Doctor of abducting her, thinks that Neris is the mastermind behind the whole thing. How does she get an invite to the wedding? What relation is she to Donna? Is she a family member or a co-worker? Like, which one is it?
I mean,
I feel like the issue is there's like there's a dissonance between like what we wrote down on paper and what we wound up filming. There's like, and then Donna disappears and everyone thinks it's a prank. And like when you get to filming, she literally dematerializes in a glowing yellow light. And everyone's just like, oh, whatever.
Oh, don't worry, guys. It's just wacky Doctor Who stuff. Don't think about it.
Okay, so I've looked up Neris as a character on the TARDIS fandom. Apparently, they are childhood friends, and a lot of this is explained in the short story called Neris. She's apparently had a whole side story dedicated to her in a series called The Blogs of Doom in Doctor Who magazine.
Did you say The Blogs of Doom?
Yes, The Blogs of Doom.
Okay.
Apparently, okay, this is weird. Apparently, when Donna disappeared, Neros comments that she's seen better on YouTube.
In 2007.
Well, yeah, no, not in 2007 or 2006, or whatever this is meant to be set.
I don't think there was a YouTube, was there?
It was in
Yeah,
very, very early infancy. It was
yeah,
like
I think
2 or 3
Yeah.
years old.
yeah, I think
She's thinking
YouTube
of
was
that elephant video, of course. The elephant was more real than Donna disappearing.
um,
Oh man.
Speaking of world building, the Santa Roboforms are back from the Christmas invasion. Now,
Yeah.
I always forget, like, because in Christmas Invasion, it's implied that they are working for or created by the Sycorax in some way, because the Doctor describes them as pilot fish, as
Hmm.
in the calm before the storm, the little fish before the big shark comes in. Here, they're under the employ of the Rachnos, and in fact, it's
Hmm.
described. The Rachnos is described as having like sort of rewired them to obey her,
Mhm.
which like it's incredibly fortuitous that these two completely separate alien races or beings, both of whom want to invade Earth for different reasons and line it up with the exact same time of year, also happen to have in their employ the exact same robots.
Yeah, it's one of those it's elements in the plot like like here's the problem. A lot of the sci-fi in this story doesn't quite fit together. It's why I think the first two acts are stronger than the third, because actually like the back and forth between Donna and the Doctor and all those characterizations, I actually find them pretty compelling, even if they're not, perfect. But by the time we get to the third act with the Arachnos being introduced and the explanations given about all this, they're not amazing explanations. There's some things that I don't know, don't quite make sense.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah.
I think at the center of that is H.C. Clements as a company, and
Mm,
because like, okay, so my understanding of the whole, and this bit is like one of the most confusing things about the entire episode to me, and I might
mm,
be misremembering or misinterpreting some of it. So if there's anything I say that you guys interpret as just flat out wrong,
mm,
just let me know.
mhm,
But H.C. Clements is a key making company,
mm.
and at some point was acquired by Torchwood. And Torchwood are the ones that built the Huon laboratory underneath the Thames.
Mm.
Um, at some point, the Rachnos infiltrates, and it just so happens that the Huon energy that Torchwood are developing is exactly what the Rachnos need to awaken their ship.
Yeah.
Well, they
So,
probably invaded the base to get the Huon particles, right?
well, is it that, or is it they invade the base and then use the base to start making Huon? Which is it?
Mm,
Like, is one I think makes more sense than the other because, like, I don't think Torchwood would even know what Huon is, right? Because it's meant to have been like
mm.
all but disappeared since the Dark Times billions and billions of years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, my only interpretation of that then is that the Rachnos must have been the one that set up the Huon laboratory. In which case, why did Torchwood acquire this key making company in the first place?
Yeah. It's as I say, there's just a lot of clarity on these points that's not really being addressed. The sort of, to an extent, it's sort of taking the science out of the science fiction, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, which is a shame because, look, as I said, Doctor Who is weird and wacky as shit. Um, I mean, there's a lot of elements of it that are quite fantastical, and that I think that's almost has always been a part of it. But there's a limit, right?
Yeah,
There's
well,
certain
here's
understandings you
another
need.
well, this is also a possibility. We don't it's
Mm,
never established at what point during the year the Battle of Canary Wharf happened, which is also the fall of Torchwood.
yeah.
The Rachnos says that they've been dousing Donna with Huon for 6 months.
Mm.
So if it was around that time, and in fact, Doomsday aired in early July, which is almost 6 months before The Runaway Bride.
Yeah.
Now, that would be what I would call good continuity if it was ever established when that happened, and if the fall of Torchwood was ever directly stated in this to be responsible for the Rachnos infiltration in the first place.
Yeah.
Because if Torchwood leave all of their facilities abandoned under the Thames,
Mm.
then Rachnos, the Rachnos Empress returns to Earth at some point, looking for her children. Finds these abandoned facilities and figures out how to filter Thames water into Huon particles somehow.
Mm.
That would be mostly okay justification in universe, I think.
Mm.
But a lot of it is left unexplained, and we have to do some massive assumptions about the chronology of the whole thing in order to make those leaps.
Yeah. I mean, and look,
And it still doesn't explain why Torchwood acquired H.C. Clements in the first place.
yeah. Yeah, as I said, there's just a whole bunch of questions that aren't really being attended to. And I can actually think of a couple of other examples similar to this.
Mhm.
This is a small one, and maybe I just was missing something, wasn't paying attention, but when the Doctor pulls out the remote control out of his pocket, where did he get that? Like, was that established, or no?
Yeah, yes, it was. After he uses his sonic screwdriver and the amplifiers to basically destroy the roboforms with sound waves, we see he
Yeah.
picks it up. So at that point,
Okay, all right. That makes more sense. Okay, that's fine. This is another bit, and this might be, I don't know, I guess a little bit pedantic, but the scientific accuracy of the flood. I wonder about that, because if this water, which is, it's the Thames, which is a lot of water, but if it's
yes.
going, sorry,
Yeah, I was agreeing with you.
yeah, like if it's going down to the center of the Earth, which is really really hot, would that water not just evaporate? Because and even like the Rachnos children being down at the center of the Earth in that heat, I could just believe that. Like if because the Rachnos has traveled across the stars, like I assume there's some form of technology they have that can help them survive high temperatures like that. But
Yeah.
the water issue it just doesn't really make sense to me, because I
Well,
would assume that it would just evaporate before it got to the bottom. Like I'm just not quite sure how that works.
we're gonna establish in next week's episode of the podcast that apparently the core of planets that have been formed around spaceships are just not that hot in general. So I guess this is just a part of it's just a
Don't do
part
that
of the
to me,
world.
Cuff. We'll deal with that when we get
We'll
to it.
deal with it next week, but apparently this is just a part of the world of Doctor Who where if the core of a planet isn't formed by rock and is instead formed by a metal spaceship, it's just perfectly fine down there.
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. That's a whole other thing, which we will get to. Mm.
There's a few more plot inconsistencies which might not be inconsistencies. So initially the way the Doctor describes the Donna teleported into the TARDIS makes some kind of sense, right? Like he describes it as the particles inside of her and the particles inside of the TARDIS become sort of linked in a way due to Donna's endorphins and all that stuff, and then attracted to each other. That's fine, but when the Doctor says that, he also at the time says the only sparks of Huon left in the universe are in my TARDIS, and that's why. But he says that in the middle of a massive Huon laboratory with loose Huon particles lying around, and apparently enough that they can basically waterboard Lance with them later on. So why didn't those particles interact? Why was it the particles deep inside the TARDIS, which at that point was stationed around a collapsing star elsewhere across the universe, that excited along with Donna's endorphins, and not
And
not the much
why did
closer
that only
one under
happen
the tent.
once?
Yeah, I mean, I think the explanation for that is just Donna's big wedding day and like the unique mix of chemicals and endorphins going on in her body activated the
Mm.
Huon, but that also implies that she prior to that point wasn't that amped up, and she certainly looked that
And
way
there's
when
like
she
no
was
other point in the
recalled.
episode where she'd be that anxious anyway. You know, it's pretty
No,
chill.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's also entirely because like they also say that she has to be it's implied anyway they didn't know the dosage, so they had Lance slowly poison her with Huon over 6 months to figure out exactly what the correct dosage was. So it's also possible that like it was the day before that she'd been given the last Huon that she needed, and then boom.
Mm. Oh, I just remembered something. I think, and you folks perhaps can correct me. I think there's a point where the doctor says that the Huon particles are deadly. Does that
Mhm.
go anywhere? Because I don't. Because I mean,
No. Once the particles leave Donna's body, um, and go to the Rachnos ship, that's apparently she's fine.
yeah.
But he said they were harmless.
He did, but then she looked at him and went, "Doctor, seriously, tell me,
Mm,
are they deadly?" And he says, "Yes."
yeah. So I guess like that works well enough. It's not. If it was like a considerable plot hole, I assume it would have stood out to me a bit more. But
Yeah, but like also like I don't know of any kind of radiation poisoning which has no symptoms at all until the right dosage and then you die. Like the way
I
human
don't
work,
think
they're
it's.
apparently well,
I don't
especially
think
when we
it's
see
radiation. Is it?
I don't. It's not radiation, but it's like the closest approximation we can make to a real world thing that these Huon
Mm.
particles are. Um, like the amount of Huon that we see resonating within her at the wedding, it's basically her entire body. If that amount of
mm,
Huon was presenting no adverse effects, how deadly can they be?
yeah, it's again, it doesn't ruin it, but there's just a lack of clarity there. You'd want, um, and maybe this is true of most of the story. The world building just isn't quite as strong as you'd want it to be.
Yeah, because we learned
Um,
that the Time Lords are the ones that eradicated all the Huon, but we're never shown or told why. All we're
mm,
told is just that it's dangerous and potentially deadly, and that it can power. It's an energy source. We don't really get
mm,
any idea as to why the Time Lords considered this that much of a problem that they would abandon their law about only observing
Mm.
to get rid of all this Huon.
yeah.
Something I find really contrived as well. That scene where like the doctor's talking to the videographer so he can witness the Huon particles for himself. It's just the camera angle from the start of the episode.
Oh yeah,
They
it's
didn't
just
like
the
create a new angle.
no,
Mm,
yeah, that videographer was apparently placed right at the front of the aisle, which
mhm,
don't do that. That's a bad place,
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point,
especially
actually.
with your big fuck off tripod that we never ever see in any of the other establishing shots during the church scene.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that before, but that's a good point. Okay, and you'd think, yeah, like it would have been more realistic if it was just some random angle.
Yeah, like if it
Well,
was a
then they
person
would have
on
to
their
recreate the CGI, which would take money.
Mm,
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
how much could it really cost to give Catherine Tate a faint golden glow? That surely can't be that much.
mm.
Every penny counts.
Every penny counts, I suppose. Well, they'd already blown their budget on the Rachnos, which I guess we
Yeah.
can talk about the Rachnos Empress now. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's impressive that they managed to get the extra eyes to blink at similar times that the actor blinks. I
Mm,
don't know if that's a
Mm.
practical or a digital effect, but I
mm.
think it's like the extra it's like that extra little detail that goes towards selling it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also I'm gonna say delightfully over the top as a
Yeah.
performance.
Nah,
No, you don't think so?
that was insufferable. I hated that.
Oh, I
Okay.
enjoyed it. I really dig it. I mean, like we were talking about when we did the Church on Ruby Road, people uh, you correct me if I'm wrong, Cuff, but there seems to be a bit of a consensus that, oh, the Goblin song, that's so silly. And I'm like, I'm sorry. So the Goblin song's a problem, but the Ragnar saying Snicker Snacker, that's not a problem for you. But
Well, the
anyway,
Goblin song was creative. The
mm,
Ragnos just feels like a Saturday morning cartoon villain.
Sure,
yeah,
I
I
get that,
mean,
but like also, you put an actor in that much makeup and give her that much prosthetics. I wouldn't want that actor to give a super chilled out or mellow performance. I would want them to ham it up as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it. The way I look at it is there is a precedent for this because it is falling into the classic Doctor Who villain archetype of very mannered, theatrical, over-the-top villains. Now, granted, um, she doesn't have like tons and tons of depth in her
No,
characterization, or she's not doing anything hugely original with it, but it works well enough. And even when she's, you know, screaming her head off about her children dying, it's emotionally effective enough in that scene to work. With that said, and this is true with a lot of other things in Doctor Who, I can understand how, if you're a more casual Who fan, if that would be really frustrating for you. I can understand that because it is very it's something else.
I think you basically hit the nail on the head there when you said like there's not a lot to the character or the portrayal besides that hamminess. I think
Mm,
I think a good example is John Sims' Master in The End of Time.
mm,
He is really putting it on. Like he's screaming, he's like going a bit like frenetic and psycho, but he
yeah,
still has those quieter moments when he's just speaking to the doctor and like I
mm,
think that's the balance that I think works if you're going to really ham it up, and there
sure,
isn't really any of that with the Rachnos. It
yeah,
really is just ham, just over the top, just like silly voice,
yeah,
and I think that can be a bit detracting from
yeah,
your main villain. I think it's not it's not the most memorable villain. It's not the most in depth or layered. I
yeah,
wouldn't even say it's the most cartoonishly over the top, which is a shame. Like
mm,
it's a Doctor Who villain that skews more towards the absurd, and
yeah,
you know your trying to find the word, your sensibilities and your tastes will typically determine if that's the kind of thing that you'll be on board
yeah,
with or not, and that's fine.
for
Um,
sure.
Something that is odd about the Rachnos portrayal and their plan in this story is that they're described as being born hungry.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't associate that kind of creature with patience. And the fact that their plan
Mm.
is to wait 6 months to dose this person with Huon when they're pretty laissez-faire about, or laissez-faire, whatever the phrase is, about just
Laissez-faire.
laissez-faire about pouring it all down Lance's gullet. And they say, "Oh, now that we know the correct dosages," but as they're pouring it in, very clearly, like 10% of that Huon is going into Lance's mouth.
Hmm.
They're gonna
Well,
have
it's like a it's a give or take a couple of 100 liters. That's
Oh
fine.
yeah, well
Hmm.
exactly. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, well, why not 6 months ago? You've clearly got so much Huon sitting around this facility.
Hmm.
Why not just why make a deal with Lance in the first place?
Hmm.
Especially if I mean, as soon as Lance says, I'm working with the Rachnos, anybody who's ever seen an episode of Doctor Who acknowledges that character's dying. You know, that's another thing where it's like it's very much the same archetype. Nothing different is done with it.
Yeah, the
But
collaborator.
yeah, but if you're gonna, why not just kidnap Lance in the first place and just pour Huon down his throat until he starts to glow? At which point, send him down or send the energy down. You've harvested it by that point. Get the Rachnos babies out as soon as you can.
Yeah,
Like I said, the Rachnos as a creature is not the way they're depicted in this story anyway. I wouldn't associate them with a particularly uh, patient and carefully thought out long term plan.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Well, I
sorry,
think
go ahead.
depicting, Lance getting force-fed all those Huon particles would spawn some unholy art on Rule 34. So
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Um, I think the the performance itself, as over the top as it is, you could have worked in you know, as you say, Cuff, the sort of the more patient element with it. But the way the Arachnos Queen is written, as you say, there does seem to be that bit of a contradiction. I mean, I could just believe that the Arachnos Queen, because she's fully evolved and she's the queen, she has more patience than her children, who again, as she says, are born hungry.
Maybe.
But
Yeah.
it's still a bit of a stretch. As I said, there's just a lot of concepts in this story that RTD doesn't seem to have really thought through all that much.
Well, I also think there's a bit of missed opportunity with the Arachnos as a species because, like, they're described as always hungry. Is it our fault that we need to feed? And then they're described like this before in the Dark Times. There's this massive war that apparently, basically hunted the Arachnos to extinction. I think that there is a tragedy in that species where it's like, of course they're ravenous and of course they eat people and planets, but it is their nature and it's how they were born. Now, I'm not saying let them feast on the worlds, but like it's an element of the character that is never even touched on in this story. Like, the tragedy
or if it is, it's barely touched on.
Yeah, it's the tragedy of like we were hunted to extinction for the way we were born, and like it almost gets there when the Arachnos Empress is screaming out for her dying children in the end. I think that moment is the most affecting moment that the villains get in this story.
Yeah.
And over the top villains can work, but they kind of need to like be met with over the topness throughout the rest of the narrative.
Well, yeah,
like
I
you
agree
think
with that as well.
about like with like Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin or Jim Carrey's The Grinch. Like it's not like they're the only insane thing in that movie.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, like we say that, or I say that, over the top villains are a staple of Doctor Who, but they also really work because Doctor Who is just a batshit insane show.
Yeah.
And as to how nutty it is will vary from story to story. But if you look at something like the Three Doctors, and you've got, Omega, who's this megalomaniacal, egotistical weirdo, that works because you can't tell me that the other stuff in the narrative, isn't crazy. We've got weird monsters with, semi-shitty practical effects wandering around with a little glowing claws, and we've got a building disappearing, and we've got black holes, and, so it all fits together. But as you say, Hadley, the over-the-top nature of this villain doesn't quite gel with the rest of it.
This is the first time in the revival era that Gallifrey is mentioned by name, which I think is interesting.
Really?
Yeah, Gallifrey, it was only ever referred to as my planet or, my home world or, the where the Time Lords lived. This was the first time in all of Revival Who that Gallifrey gets name dropped, which is
where the Time Lords roamed.
That seems quite astonishing now that you've pointed that out, because maybe it's just because I'm a classic Who fan, because I know what Gallifrey is, but like that is bizarre. Like I'd never noticed that before. That's very interesting.
I get that with like Simpsons supporting characters sometimes. Like
yeah,
Cletus doesn't show up until Bart gets an elephant, and Disco Stu doesn't show up until the George H.W. Bush episode.
and also the Autons, which have been present in Doctor Who revival since the beginning, have only ever been called Autons once, and it was in neither of the episodes they appeared in.
Oh,
so I mean, the show just does this sometimes, I guess. I don't know. I think it is bizarrely knowing that now, like constantly having the Doctor say "I'm not from Mars" is kind of building up to that moment where he finally says the name of his planet for the audience who don't know at that point. Because I'm sure, like, if you're a child in 2006 watching this at Christmas, and the Doctor says so many times "I'm not from Mars," you might go, "Yeah, he's from." Oh, where is he from? And then as he's giving his like short speech about my home is gone, but its name lives on, it builds up that moment, and then you hear he says Gallifrey, and the Arachnos reacts in that big way, and it's just the Doctor being really cold. Like this entire sequence, I think, is really, really strong. When he's drowning the Arachnos and just standing there, there's fire behind him and in front of him, and simultaneously the place is being flooded. There's water raining from the sky and flooding in all around him, and he's just standing there, silhouetted by everything, watching it all unfold as the
Yeah.
Arachnos is
And plagues of
screaming out.
Egypt shit.
Yes, it is kind of like a plague of Egypt, like Moses, and the
Yeah.
Arachnos is screaming out in complete heartbreaking anguish, and all he can do is watch on. Oh
Yeah.
god, it's such an effective moment and really brings out that darker side of the character, which
Yeah.
me and you have established a long time now, Fitz, is absolutely crucial for this characterization of this character.
Yeah.
Not just the 10th Doctor, but any version of the Doctor needs this darkness underneath.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I've before have said that is really, really critical. Because even in the classic series where it's not, for the most part, explicitly explored, you still have that tension, I think, in a lot of those stories that, you've got the ha-ha, funny, wacky traveler doing wacky traveler stuff, but then you think, oh, actually, there's a bit of, menace. You wonder, who is this person? What have they got planned? And it's, as you say, very, very thematically and narratively satisfying to see it show up here. It's really, I think, just setting up the whole Time Lord Victorious bit, and it does so like it announces itself with this scene, and it's very powerful. And the fact that you have Donna sort of coming to grips with that and questioning the Doctor and saying, "Hey, do you realize you just killed a bunch of children? Do you maybe want to reflect on that?"
Yeah, it was also highlighting the importance of a companion, especially post Rose. Like having Donna be the one to break him out of his fury and beg him to stop, which is going to become crucial when we revisit Turn Left a little later on. Like this is the moment that would have killed the Doctor if Donna wasn't there, and we know this from the show. We'll see this in 2 seasons' time.
For sure.
Yeah, like this, like for as weak in various aspects as the third act of this episode is, this sequence is a massive upswing.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the highlight of the third act, and I mean, and that makes sense because it's near the end, but it's certainly the strongest element. But partly because it's being put into context in previous characterizations and even previous lore that had been established, really. But because it is so effectively done and so menacing, it really sobers the audience up, which is really great.
We also in this moment get a Mr. Saxon reference.
What moment was that?
It wasn't specifically this flooding sequence, but when the tanks come out to destroy the Web Star, we hear over the walkie-talkie that they have orders from Mr. Saxon to fire it ready.
Oh, right.
Ready. Yeah, so I don't remember,
Nice.
and I'm almost positive that it might have been at the very least alluded to. Yeah. So in Love and Monsters, we saw there was a Mr. Saxon reference in one of the newspapers, but this is the first audible reference to Harold Saxon that we'll get in the show. God, I love the way that RTD can set things up for his own future stories.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
I can't just wait to see what Mrs. Flood gets up to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. You've
Speaking of floods,
sobered me up once again.
Oh, they're gonna pay off why the Doctor and Donna just happen to relate to each other at the start of the episode in the Star Beast. Totally gonna happen.
Look, that's just folded in with the level of destiny and coincidence that has basically always existed with those two characters, and how they always just happen to meet up at the most opportune moments. That for me isn't that big a deal.
It's just
I
some
mean,
lingering Huon particles attracting her to the TARDIS.
Yeah.
I mean that seems to be as a good as explanation as any.
Sure.
I think
I mean, we're not going to get one, so
yeah. I mean, it's yeah, like that element of destiny.
But also, it's just the TARDIS being autonomous, as we've learned from the
Mm,
Doctor's wife, and how the
mm,
TARDIS will often take the Doctor where they need to be.
yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. I think they may have been like RTD may have been stretching the logic of all that a little bit thin, but in the context of the show and everything that happens, it does make enough sense, I think.
Yeah, and it's not the
Um,
most uh, hand wavy thing that happened in the Starbase anyway, so it's fine.
mm, mm.
Two
Um,
wrongs make a right.
yes. um, what else is there? I like David Tennant in this story. I think that I think he has a really odd place in Doctor Who um lore as as an actor of the Doctor, like where
Mm.
he maybe classic Doctors withstanding had more companions, but I think one on one, David Tennant as an actor has had more companions than anyone else. So
Yeah, if you're talking like like non-ensemble
yeah,
companion like TARDIS
Mhm.
crews, yeah, I think because a lot of the TARDIS crews from the classic era were very ensemble. Um,
yeah. But I think it just goes to show how good an actor David Tennant is. That like even in this one episode, you can tell there's some like the chemistry between him and Catherine Tate.
hmm,
Like it's not
Mhm.
at Donna Doctor levels yet,
but
but
there's
like
hints
he's
of it.
clearly he's clearly like not uncomfortable with Billy Piper not being there.
Mm. Yeah, it works quite well. I'm going to highlight something, and this may be my interpretation. I'll be very interested to see what you think about this, Cuff. But there were a lot of moments, and until the end, you know, when it gets all super serious, there are a number of moments in this story where David Tennant, he felt almost like Matt Smith. I don't know how accurate it would be to say that, but
Interesting.
that was just my interpretation. That there's something about, and I can't quite determine what it is, but there's something about a combination of the writing and the performance that feels
See,
like
that's
Matt
interesting.
Smith.
I think we highlighted this in Fear Her as well, and
Yeah.
there I think we are in agreement on. I don't think I see it here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just because there's elements of the character that are allowed to be a bit more comedic and silly, and you're associating that
Yeah.
with by far the silliest Doctor, Matt Smith. But
Yep.
I, I mean, even that is like
Yeah.
arguably.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but I don't think I see it. It might just be because I wasn't looking out for it, maybe. But
Mm.
um, I don't know, Hadley. What do you think?
Yeah. What
I
do you
think
think,
they're
Hadley?
basically the same character, so I couldn't really tell you.
Oh, I don't know about that, Hadley.
Yeah, Fitz is going to have some very strong objections to that such a
Well,
heinous statement.
well, here's
Oh,
the
look, they're
thing.
both wacky 30-something white men, you know? Who gives a shit?
I mean, that's not an inaccurate estimation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good God. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? I think you even said, Cuff, that by the time Series 5 came along, wasn't there sort of an expectation that David Tennant was going to continue? So a lot of the writing for Matt Smith in that first season was sort of similar to
Well, not
David
even
Tennant, so maybe that's where the confusion's coming up?
it's not even just that. Like even going into season 6, Neil Gaiman's first script that he wrote, The Doctor's Wife, he initially wrote that thinking it would be David Tennant's Doctor. Um, so
Right.
and then like he had a fair bit of time to Matt Smith it up a bit.
Yeah.
Um, but like yeah, I mean, in series 5, as is often the case with the first Doctor, they didn't exactly know what kind of Doctor he was going to be, so they kind
Yeah.
of like based it a bit on what David Tennant's Doctor was, and then a little bit of what David Moffat knew he wanted the Doctor to be,
Yeah.
and then from there, like the elements of the performance and the writing that either the creative team or the fans latched onto the most, they became more in the forefront as
Yeah.
series 6 and 7 continued. And
Mm.
there are certainly heaps of moments in series 5 that feel odd for Matt Smith's Doctor to do.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't think it extends to Runaway Bride.
Mhm.
Well, I'll ask what specific moments leapt out at you in this
There
regard.
was a couple of moments, especially when the Doctor is getting very sort of manic and explaining the wacky scientific concepts, and I get that that's basically a staple of David Tennant's character,
Yeah, that to
but it
me doesn't really stick out.
yeah, but it maybe it was those things, but in context of but like there was also an absence of like what this there seemed to be sort of an absence of not seriousness, but I don't know,
I
like
get what you mean, right? Like it's the
mm,
Doctor being excited by understanding what the science of it all is,
yeah,
and then Donna being left to be like, well, what does this mean for me? Like, am I in danger? But I think
yeah,
that, but I think most doctors will just rattle on about the science until they remember to be more
yeah.
humane and more of
Well,
a
yeah. I mean,
humanitarian.
that's fair. I mean, maybe it was like the weird, like the exuberance in combination with the lack of social awareness at the time. But as you
Social
say, that's
awareness
not.
might be a factor, yeah.
Yeah, could it's I think it may be the combination of them both because that lack of social awareness when thinking of scientific concepts, that is I think a staple of basically all doctors, and I think we're going to see it in Underworld. But it maybe was just a combination of the two of them. Having said that, as I've often said, my viewing of the Moffat era, particularly the Matt Smith era, is patchy. So um there's probably something I'm missing there, but that again, I can't quite explain it, but that's just a feeling I got um, when watching it. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see when we actually get to the Matt Smith era, see how it turns out.
Yeah, I think we're basically done with the Runaway Bride.
Mm. Um, I do want to ask Hadley, if you could expand on your thoughts a little bit about why the Rachnos was a problem. I felt like we were sort of getting into some interesting territory there, and we got a bit sidetracked.
All right. Well, I just I didn't like her lines. A lot of them were very
Hmm.
cliched
Yeah,
and predictable.
Yeah,
that's
they
fair.
Yeah.
yeah, she does have a bit of a Saturday morning cartoon villain um
It
quality
doesn't
to
help
her.
that you're like seeing her shadow like for most of the episode. She's in her lair. She's like, "I'll get you next time, Doctor."
Yeah,
You've won
It's
this
very
round,
claw.
Pratchett.
yeah,
Exactly. It's very claw. It's very claw.
yeah. It is actually. Um, yeah, I think that's fair. Again, I'm not bothered by it too much. I can enjoy the wackiness about it. Again, there's definitely precedent for it in Doctor Who, but yes, I can understand why that would be
Yeah, and even in
quite frustrating.
even when there is precedent, oftentimes it is accompanied by not so cliched writing. I'll admit a lot of her lines
Yeah,
are very like, "Oh, look at me! I'm scary and a spider and
yeah.
hungry." Ha ha ha.
I mean, like, and we'll think of it this right. Without that ending of the tragedy,
Hmm.
what is she as a character really? There isn't a lot there.
She's the bad guy.
And also another thing, like we talk a lot about the design and how interesting and wacky it is, but without that design, would we remember this character that much? I mean,
Probably not.
yeah, I mean, I know we've got that ending with the tragedy part of it, but even then, without that meticulous, crazy design, would she be all that memorable? And as you say, Garth, probably not.
Well, also, I mean, we haven't touched on this yet, but this idea that, like, I mean, it's not really explored too much, but the fact that the Web Star starts attacking the streets of London before it really needs to, because the justification is get the meat ready for my children, and I guess
Mm,
the weird science behind that is that the babies won't be able to feed on uncooked flesh,
mm,
which doesn't really ring true because of how ravenous they are from birth. You'd think that
mm,
if they were born that way, that especially in the dark times before a lot of this technology would have been um, available, if not like, well, certainly not to this extent. Billions and billions of years later, their technology must have advanced.
mm,
Um, like, why would they? if they're born hungry, why would they have to wait for their meals to be cooked? You would think that logically, like, if the Rachnos was ever going to start attacking London, it would be as revenge for drowning her kids. That's when the Webstar should have started attacking, if it was ever
Yeah.
going to. But the fact that it just starts electrocuting the streets sort of for no reason halfway through, I don't think that helps with the whole cliche villain thing, where it's literally just like there are these elements which are to help her children and reform the society, and then because I'm evil, attack.
Yeah. Again, generic sort of, villain of the week. I think that's not an unfair characterization of the Ragnos Queen.
No, yeah, 100%.
Do you guys like that drag joke?
Yeah,
Oh.
that didn't age well.
They think I'm in drag.
Well, that's like, in fairness, that's as much as they devoted to it. They didn't double down on it, and like there are people on the street who are that awful. So like, I'd rather it not be there, but it could have been a lot worse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't talked about the formation of the Earth. I think it's a fine sequence, and like, as far as Donna's characterization, I think it does a lot without saying too much about like setting her up to be the future companion and sort of like not like recontextualizing her issues. And the Doctor then goes, "Well, no, because like there's a point to it. There's a point to even the littlest things that humans complain about." That conversation, I think, is very, very well written and really quite nice, especially after coming off of the meeting the Rachnos for the first time and getting all that over the top stuff, to then like bring things down a little bit and have the first of what will be many very effective Dr. Donna conversations.
Yeah. I will say, I think the Doctor says some point in the story, I'm going back further than like we've been before. I couldn't exactly tell what he was saying, but it felt like almost a bit of contradiction to canon, because I am pretty certain there's a story, it might be Enlightenment, some Fifth Doctor story, where they go back to the beginning of the universe, to its formation, which is interesting.
Okay.
So,
well, in that case, my interpretation of that is he's just talking about in terms of the timeline of the Earth.
Yeah.
Well, how much earlier can you go?
Well, yeah. Before the universe, explore the previous one. That might actually be interesting to do at some point.
Futurama did it.
Well, yeah. Well, tell me something Futurama didn't do, and then we'll have another conversation about what Doctor Who can.
They didn't have an NFT episode. Oh wait, they did.
That's true. Yeah. I stopped watching the new season, as much as I hate to admit it. It didn't do anything for me by a certain point, which is a shame to say about Futurama, as good as it is. Anyway, Runaway Bride. I think we've talked about everything we need to.
Yeah.
I have one final note.
Go for it.
I didn't know how else to bring this up, but I did want to bring it up on the podcast the next time I saw it.
Okay.
It was very funny watching our Love and Monsters episode, and you cut out the part where we talked about you calling Rose a cow. And I just wanted to get an apology from you on this episode, and this time you don't cut it out.
Jesus, okay. Look, if you're gonna, I imagine that if I cut this out as well, you're just gonna bring it up again next time we do this.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I don't know. You're not a bad person. It was just very funny.
Okay. In that case, I don't remember which episode I did say that Rose was a cow. I apologize. I got heated and used language I regret. Happy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I do want to address this as well. And it's a good time to it's a good moment to do this. In our Church on Ruby Road episode, and someone pointed this out in the comment section as well. At some point before we start the timescales analysis, I make a big point of saying we're allowed to have different opinions. There is no objective truth in media analysis. And then not 2 minutes later, I say people who think that the new RTD era is just as bad as the Chibnall era are objectively wrong. And someone pointed that out, and I was like, you know what? Good point. I don't think either of us caught that, but fair enough on catching me on the hypocrisy of that one.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think the subtext of that is that those people were clearly arguing on bad faith.
Yeah,
but I don't think
but
we made
still.
that clear enough. And there might be people who have that opinion for completely legitimate reasons. So, fair enough. I think just in general, it's just about watching language while getting heated about a topic that you're passionate about, and
Yeah,
from there we can just all move on and be fine.
yeah.
Own it.
Own it. Okay,
That's
I'll
what-
just I'll
Basically,
cows then.
yeah. I've said the dumbest shit on stale bread. Seriously, I
That's
think
true.
Jared has said coloured people, and he was immediately called out.
It was smart to bring this up right at the end of the episode as well, assuming that people get this far.
Yeah, this way, yeah, I'll watch it. So I'll be checking Cuff. I'll be watching.
All right. Well, knowing that, I'll specifically not. I tell you what, what I'll do is I'll edit everything else out, so the episode is
Thank you.
just the apology. How's that?
Thank you. Very good. Don't have a cow.
I'm gonna give the Runaway Bride a 5.
I'm gonna give it I think a 6.
5.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think I would have landed on 6 before we started talking, but I think the fact that we highlighted way more negatives than positives mean that, like, as good as the positive moments are, I don't think they completely make up for the stuff about it.
Yeah,
that's half-baked.
sure. For me, it just like makes it up enough because the good moments, even like in the first 2 acts, the dynamic between Donna and the Doctor is quite good. But yeah, certainly it doesn't fix it to the point where I could give it any higher than a 6. Yeah. So
I always win people over.
Well, as we discussed before, it's way easier to convince someone that they don't like something than it is to convince them that they do.
Yeah.
I convinced you guys to like Fear Her, so I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, that's true. You might just have the magic tongue. I regret saying that. I'm sorry.
Ask my partner.
Jesus, why do we always go down this well when you're here? It was Love and Monsters and now this.
Yeah, I think that was mostly sweeting for that one.
It
to be
was,
fair.
in fairness, yeah.
Yeah.
One could make the case that none of us were really making an effort to stop that line of conversation. So you're going to be back on the podcast next week, Hadley. But until then, anything you'd like to plug?
Well, Stale Bread is currently in a bit of a weird, like limbo. In the comment section, everyone, please urge my friend Jared to read the Goosebumps books he was meant to read 2 months ago, so we can make the video. And most likely, if we don't get a viewer beware out in the next few months, we'll be seeing you for our next Joel Haver Oscars challenge movie.
Yes, yeah. I might as well plug this as I'm almost definitely going to be part of it. For the last couple of years on the Stale Bread YouTube channel, we have taken part in Joel Haver's Creative Challenge, where during the Oscars we quote unquote write and film a full 40+ minute movie and then edit it in the next 7 days. Both times we've done it, it's been really, really fun and really good creative challenge. We're doing it again this year, so definitely tune into Stale Bread for that one. If you if you didn't know, if you're one of the few people who are listening to this and don't know what our faces look like, that'll be a way you can find out what some of us look like. If you were that kind of fan. But next week on the podcast, we're going to be looking at the Fourth Doctor story, Underworld.
Yes. That is a thing that will happen.
Yep, and
we will say things about it.
Oh god. Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
Exactly.
And happy 2024. And big stuff coming for Who's Review this year. Big stuff coming for Doctor Who. Hope you're joining us for the whole ride. And I hope you have a good year.
See you next time.